Good morning, everybody. Welcome to IndyCar. It's 9 o'clock. It is Friday, the 15th of March, and my name's Gordon Ross. And now I'm breaking into the advertised bulletin this morning because of events which have happened at Christchurch in New Zealand over the last 24 hours. Most of you will probably be aware from the morning news programmes that there's been a mass shooting at two mosques in Christchurch in New Zealand yesterday afternoon, when it seems at least four gunmen and one woman broke into two mosques at the same time, shooting indiscriminately. I understand the death toll, according to the latest reports from Reuters, is now over 50 people confirmed dead and over 20 people seriously injured in an attack which was largely pre-planned and which was filmed and live streamed on social media by the murderers themselves. Social media has been very quick to take down these videos before they can be disseminated much further, because they really show in graphic detail the sickening cowardice of the people who perpetrated this massacre of innocent civilians in a place of worship. Imagine if this had happened in the Church of Scotland or the Church of England, how you would feel. And so for my part as a broadcaster, I would just like to express my sympathy to everybody in Christchurch this morning for what's plainly been a dreadful outrage, and perpetrated, it seems, at least by one Australian who's in custody at the moment. And I say it seems, we don't know exactly who's responsible for what yet, but we do know that one of the people concerned who's been held in custody is of Australian citizenship. Now, all of this is deeply worrying because I have a connection with Australia, a family connection with Australia, and lived there for a short period myself in the late 1970s. And in the 1970s in Australia, there were some concerns about immigration in Australia, even in the 70s. But back then, Australia was still a developing nation. Since then, racial tensions in Australia have grown in much the same way as they have done in England and Wales recently due to Brexit. And this increasing of racial tensions due to an influx of refugees. We are used to hearing of refugees flooding into Europe, but in Australia, refugees have been flooding into Australia from places like Indonesia and other areas which have been under threat due to sectarian violence and Islamist violence of various kinds, as well as bombings and wars of all sorts of other kinds. So Australia has had to face up to the fact that it is been receiving a large numbers of immigrants. The problems for Australia have been that they have largely been trying to detain these people, most of them arriving by boats, on islands in the middle of nowhere, and holding them there indefinitely and trying to repatriate them back to wherever it was they had originated, in an attempt to shut out immigration from Australia. So it's changed days for Australians that this is happening, and that such far-right extremists now exist in Australia and are exporting their vile right-wing ideology into neighbouring peaceful New Zealand is quite a shocking development. Okay, to return to the subject of today's programme. Those of you who follow such things might have seen me presenting Scotland at 7 last night and attempting to make some kind of sense out of the multitude of amendments which were voted on in the House of Commons yesterday. The upshot of all of this, when you boil it all down, is that several things have been taken off the table permanently. One of them is that Article 50 will not now be revoked. That means there is no chance that Brexit will be called off. So it is definitely going to happen unless something very tragic occurs. In the meantime, Brexit is going ahead. So those of us who were hoping that perhaps there might be a chance of it being called off have been disappointed. There have also been amendments defeated which were asking for a delay so that there could be a second referendum. Those have also been now taken off the table. There will be no second referendums on Brexit. Brexit's going to happen, and nobody is going to get a second chance to second guess their first votes in the referendum in 2016. So there's not going to be a chance for the public to change their minds. The politicians have now decided that we are not allowed to have that right to vote again on it. That's been taken away from us permanently. Various other amendments which would have allowed for things to change course have also failed, notably an amendment tabled by the leader of the opposition and the leader of the Labour Party. So those have all fallen as well, and what we've been left with is this final motion which asks for the British government to contact the European Union and to ask for an extension to the time period for Article 50 up to, but not later than, the 30th of June this year. Now, that is a 3-month delay to the Brexit process. Now, it's important to understand what this means. In the context of where we're at the moment, Mrs May's deal, as you know, has been defeated twice now. But it's not the end of Mrs May's so-called zombie deal. It's going to be resurrected and propped up out of the grave again one more time in an effort to get primarily the Conservative Party to rally behind it and to force it through, even if it's only by 1 or 2 votes, but to get it over the finish line, and then to use this 3-month period as what they call a technical delay, a technical extension. Now, a technical extension exists so that if the deal, Mrs May's deal, is passed next week when it gets its 3rd reading and its 3rd vote, if it passes, there would be just enough time for the British government to then pass all of the multitude of other pieces of legislation which will allow that Brexit process to happen lawfully with the European Union, because there have to be agreements with the European Union which have to ratify this decision before the final Brexit day can happen, and that would be at the end of this technical extension on the 30th of June. So we're looking at basically at the point where the school holidays start is when Brexit should start. Now, the only thing that could possibly derail this is if Mrs May's deal again is defeated for a 3rd time. Now, if it's defeated for a 3rd time, I think we can definitely write it off as a dead duck. But that would then mean that there would need to be a far longer extension, perhaps as much as 2 years, to enable the British government to sit down with all of the parties at Westminster and decide what they can actually unite around. It would probably involve removing many of the red lines that the Conservative Brexiters have insisted on putting in there. And it may well be that the end result will be unrecognisable from what was actually voted on in 2016. So that's where we're at the moment, to try and crystallise things. We're at a point where there is time to draw breath and time for politicians at Westminster to get a good night's sleep and think about what they've done. As far as I'm concerned, all of these politicians are on the naughty step this morning, and they have to think what they've done this week and reflect on how they've let down the electorate of the United Kingdom. Scotland, as you know, has been marginalised from all of this. Because Scotland voted no to Brexit, because we voted to remain in the European Union, we are being ignored. The British state broadcaster, the BBC, has had 2 complaints made against it by leading SNP MPs yesterday, simply because every time a Scottish MP would get up to speak from the SNP at the end of a debate, or near the end of a debate, the BBC would cut the feed instantly before they got a chance to make their point. So everybody in the United Kingdom gets to speak in Parliament and be covered by the BBC, except for Scottish SNP MPs. And this is blatantly unfair, because nobody in England is getting to hear what Scottish MPs think of any of this. And as far as the people of England are concerned, because they're not seeing or hearing these Scottish MPs saying anything, they're assuming, because the BBC has cut them out of the picture, that these Scottish MPs are quite happy with everything that's happening in Westminster. Again, it's all part of the way the media is manipulating the situation at, we believe, the instructions of the British establishment. Scotland is not to be noticed. We have to be seen but not heard. We're the naughty children of Westminster who have had the temerity to say that Brexit is a really stupid idea and that we're having nothing to do with it. And so Scotland is to be ignored, to be airbrushed out of existence for the remaining part of the deliberations on Brexit. Now that begs the question, what is the point of the SNP remaining at Westminster in any numbers at all, apart from perhaps one MP could perhaps sit in the debates and just listen to what's happening and report back to Scotland, because that would probably do as much good as 35 of them sitting down there wasting their time. Okay, so that's where we're at with Brexit. There's a hiatus while the British government decides how to dress up Mrs May's deal. I think the tactic is going to be that it is going to be May's deal or no deal, and if the European Union behaves the way I think they will, then the technical extension will only be granted if Mrs May's deal is a success, because the European Union is looking for evidence that there is something coming from the British side that they have agreed upon. Because if they can't agree upon anything, there is no point in the European Union giving them more time, because the more time will just be wasted with more uncertainty and more damage to both the economy of the European Union and the economy of the United Kingdom. And of course, the economy of Scotland will suffer through all of this prevarication, procrastination, dithering and fence-sitting that is going on in Westminster. We are supposed to have a government which is decisive in acting on our instructions. It's not doing any of those things at the moment. But, like I say, I don't believe that if Mrs May's deal is defeated again, I think we will exit without a deal, because I cannot see the European Union giving any more chances to Mrs May. She's had 2 chances. They've told her she will not get a 3rd chance. This is it. If her deal fails next week, then I think a no-deal Brexit is almost inevitable, in which case the SNP will call the referendum, because they'll have to. There won't be any choice left to them after that. However, the good news is that if they do call a referendum, that all the opinion polls that have been published in Scotland in the last 2 weeks have said that there is at least 60% of Scottish voters are in favour of a second independence referendum against any form of Brexit whatsoever. And in fact, in some polls, particularly the newspaper online polls, where you get over 16 or 17,000 people respond, that figure of 60% has now grown to almost 70% in some cases of the Scots' readership of these newspapers wanting a second chance to decide about independence. And my opinion is, for what it's worth, that people don't say that they would rather have an independence referendum unless they intend to vote for independence. The people who oppose an independence referendum are the Tories, who don't want it because A, they don't want independence for Scotland, and B, they know they would lose. So the times are coming to a head now. I think the tide is now in favour of independence. We're still at the brink of Brexit, and I don't believe now, given all the votes that there have been, that the English government or the English politicians intend to stop. I don't think they're going to stop Brexit. They've decided it's going ahead, it can't be revoked, and there will not be a second referendum on the EU. So all the choices have narrowed down now to one: Mrs May's deal or a no-deal Brexit. And my money at the moment, and I think a lot of other people's money, is now on the no deal happening, because the European Union's run out of patience with them. Okay, that's the end of the broadcast on Brexit matters. You're probably sick of hearing about it anyway. And now for something a little different. Last week I made a suggestion that the new space launch complex, which is being planned for an area of Sutherland in the Highlands, I had claimed that I thought that might be just a red herring, something which the UK was throwing out there as a bone, if you like, to the Scottish dog, something to keep us chewing over as a kind of gift, a little bung, a little bribe for Scotland that we were getting something good that the rest of the UK didn't have. Now, I am going to make an apology now because I do believe I was wrong about this. Not necessarily about the motivation of the UK government for suggesting this plan, nor for the comments I made concerning the fact that the lion's share of the funding for launching satellites from this launch site has gone to a big American transnational arms manufacturer, which is Lockheed Martin. So I wouldn't apologise for those, but I would like to apologise to those smaller Scottish companies who are going to be using this launch site to launch their satellite launchers from, because they plainly are working on the basis that this launch site will be available to them. They've been promised that it will be, and the company, one of the companies which I mentioned is Skyrora. Now Skyrora is a Scottish company. It is registered in Edinburgh. It's only 20 months old, but it is already set up manufacturing and assembly plants both here in Scotland, near Livingston, I believe. I'll check the location of that, but also in Eastern Europe as well. So they are very serious about their intentions. And yesterday, the same company, Skyrora, had arranged for the last British rocket ever launched in Australia, the Woomera test range, the remains of that, to be brought to Holyrood's Parliament and to be displayed outside the Parliament as a reminder of what the British space programme could have been had it not been cancelled for political reasons during the Cold War. Skyrora themselves have taken what the technology that was developed by the British scientists in the Isle of Wight back in the 1960s to develop a rocket which used what they call room temperature propellants. Now these are propellants which are liquid, but unlike liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, they not have to be super cold. And they used a propellant mix of jet fuel, very small amount of jet fuel incidentally, and hydrogen peroxide or high test peroxide, which is a bit like the stuff people use to dye their hair, but about 80% stronger. And what that stuff does is when you burn it, when you pass it over silver gauze, it catalyzes, and what it does is it changes this, chemically changes the hydrogen peroxide into superheated steam at 600 degrees Celsius. So you end up with effectively a steam rocket with very high temperature superheated steam as the thrust. Clever stuff, this. By introducing a little bit of jet fuel into this high temperature mix of superheated steam, you then get combustion as well, which adds to the thrust, and you've got a rocket with a pretty good performance considering it's using room temperature propellants. So Skyrora have taken this old technology from 1971 and re-engineered it for the 21st century to create a small launcher which can be launched from virtually anywhere without needing special insulated tanks of hydrogen and oxygen, because hydrogen peroxide and jet fuel can be stored in 40-gallon drums, in 200-litre fuel drums. There are special safety precautions needed for that, but it means the rocket's highly portable. It can be taken anywhere and launched from anywhere, which in the case of a Scottish launch site is perfect. The kind of launcher they're talking about would be similar to Black Arrow, which in 1971 launched Britain's only indigenously launched satellite called Prospero. And the Black Arrow rocket at the time was so good at its job that Prospero satellite launched in 1971 is still in orbit around the Earth just now. So it's a good system, and it will be perfect for launching mini-sats or CubeSats, of which Scotland is the biggest manufacturer in Europe. The Glasgow company what are they called now? Because they changed their names recently. Clyde Space was the original name. I think they're still called Clyde Space. But Clyde Space build satellites called CubeSats, which are very small satellites, can be launched in large numbers very cheaply. And this Skyrora rocket is ideal for putting these small payloads up into polar orbits. That is, launching over the North Pole and going around the Earth from top to bottom, if you like, over both the North and South poles. And that enables researchers to look at things like the Arctic sea ice, how the ice floes are melting, migration patterns of the animals that live there, how methane is being released from the tundra as it melts, and so on. So very important work can be done from that. And Skyrora is the first truly Scottish space launcher company that there's ever been. And I speak as somebody who was involved unofficially in space research back in the 1980s, that we never had an official space program since the days of Harold Wilson back in 1971, when the whole of the British space program was cancelled to allow the Americans to compete against the Russians in the moon race. So anyway, long story short, Scotland now has a space program. Whether the British launch site is the one that's used or not, Skyrora has a launcher design which could be launched from anywhere. And in fact, there is already a Scottish indigenous launch site being constructed and funded on Shetland. There are plans for other ones in other parts of Scotland as well. And there are existing sites such as Machrihanish and South Uist, where the UK military used to test missiles and rockets and had test ranges with sea launch sites. So there are a variety of opportunities open to Skyrora, and for the first time at Holyrood there was a debate about a Scottish space programme yesterday, another historic first for Scotland. Scotland is now an emerging country which will have its own space programme when it's independent, something which not even England has. And England claims, to have the 5th largest economy in the world, and yet has no indigenous space program and no launcher to launch its own satellites. But Scotland will, and this is a first for us, and another piece of good news for a country which is building itself up prior to becoming independent. And so I wanted to leave you with that positive note today. So to round up the day's news, well, obviously the first thing is the tragedy that happened in Christchurch in New Zealand yesterday, with the mass killing of over 50 innocent civilians and the wounding of more than 20 others in what can only be described as butchery, literally butchery, a brutal attack filmed, live streamed across social media. It's an appalling act, and I sincerely hope that they've caught all the people concerned. And also, we now know that Brexit has got a breathing space, while Mrs May and her team try to figure out a way whereby they can get the deal that Mrs May has negotiated over the line in time to get an extension to Article 50 so that everything could be put in place and the UK might actually leave the EU by the 30th of June. And finally, to round up, Scotland now has, for the first time in its history, its own space programme and will have its own indigenous rocket launching capability. Something, as I say, which even the British government doesn't have. So, although it's a wet and windy and stormy looking day, and tomorrow is supposed to bring snow, at least we have something, some rays of hope for Scotland to keep us warm through the weekend. I'll be speaking to you again hopefully on Sunday on IndyCar, and I'll be back again next Thursday presenting Scotland at 7 on Broadcasting Scotland on YouTube. So I'll see you all on Sunday, and then throughout the week and on Thursday evening. Anyway, have a great weekend everybody, and I'll speak to you Sunday. Bye bye.